Hey folks, Joe with JC Baseball Collector here back at you with another divisional preview. We're going to be taking a look at the National League Central today. So, you may have seen my videos for the AL West and the NL West up on the channel last week. Today and tomorrow, we're going to take ourselves a look at the NL Central and the AL Central. So, two divisions perhaps on a little bit on the weaker side, but fun divisions full of interesting teams nonetheless. So, just as a quick reminder of the way that I structure these videos, I'll go through all five teams, kind of worst to best. We'll go through some notable offseason moves. I have a stud and a dud section, so kind of like a star or an X factor on the team, and then a potential bust or regression candidate. We'll take a look at a prospect to watch or a star prospect, and then we'll look at some bounce back candidates, sleepers, breakout candidates, and then do a quick over under based on Barstool Sportsbook over under figures from a couple of weeks ago. All right, let's dive right in. These videos tend to be a little bit more long form and maybe the 40-45 minute range. We'll see if this one goes that long, but we'll dive right in and we'll see how it goes. All right, first we're going to start off with the Cincinnati Reds, so the basement dwellers of the National League Central. In the offseason, they made a couple of moves around the edges, nothing obviously groundbreaking. One big one was adding Will Myers. He's been a pretty consistent player. I wouldn't call him a superstar, but he's been super consistent. 6 out of his last 8 seasons, he's had an OPS plus between 109 and 115. So like marginally above average player for most of the last decade. They also added Nick Solak, so kind of a utility player. Luke Weaver for a little pitching. On the lost side, guys that they lost. I'm going to call this guy out just because he followed me around quite a bit in 2020. I seem to pull parallels and things of this guy out of every single product, and I also just thought this card was pretty sharp. Aristides Aquino, so not the most special guy in the world, but he is gone from the Reds now, and he's playing in Japan. So he looked like a guy who had maybe some promise to hit with a ton of power, even though he struck out a ton, but that never really remanifested itself for Cincinnati, and he's now going to play Japan. They also lost Mike Minor and Donovan Solano, so nothing too super notable there. All right, looking ahead at the stud. This was kind of tough. They don't have a particularly great roster, which is actually why I don't have a dud. There's kind of just too many guys to choose from, and I apologize to all my Reds fans out there, Professor Collector and the lot, but I think that they know kind of where this franchise is currently at. So for stud, I actually went with Nick Lodolo. He's, like I said, there's not a ton of guys to choose from here. And he's probably not quite as exciting as like Hunter Green, for example, who will be the opening day starter for the Reds this upcoming season. I actually like Lodolo a bit better, just personally. I think from a collectability standpoint, hobby-wise, Green is definitely the guy. He's more exciting. He's the fireballer. He throws 100 and some odd miles an hour. He strikes out a ton of batters. But I think Lodolo, has more upside and could potentially have a better, more sustainable career. So he had a pretty solid rookie season last year, 3.66 ERA, 131 strikeouts in 103 innings. So it's not like he's not exactly a strikeout machine himself. Obviously, he had pretty limited minor league time though. He only made 25 starts in the minor league since 2019. Obviously, they lost 2020 with the COVID season, but he was good at every single level. So, he's a very solid pitcher. I think he has a ton of potential. Him and Green can definitely anchor that rotation. I think Lodolo will be the more reliable guy, while Green will be the more exciting guy. One thing to note, though, he hit 19 batters in 19 games last year, so that's probably something he's going to have to get under control. Maybe it'll be his calling card. Maybe he'll become a little bit of a bad boy hitting guys. Who knows? But Nick Lodolo is my stud for the Reds. Like I said, no dud, so we're going to jump right into Prospect Watch. The Reds did have the 13th ranked farm system, according to Keith Law, coming into this season. And their prospect to watch is going to be no surprise to anyone, is Elly De La Cruz. So anyone who opened any Bowman in 2022 is going to know this guy very well. I actually pulled this one out. I just hit this in a break. It's his base card from Bowman's Best, so I did want to show off a little Bowman's Best just because it's a hot new product. But Elly De La Cruz, like I said, he was the biggest chase in 2022 Bowman. He's the 8th ranked prospect on average right now. He's a switch hitting 21-year-old shortstop who just had a monster year in 2022. He came in, he hit 304, he had 945 OPS, something like that. 28 homers, he stole 47 bags. He's a super passionate guy. People compare him to O'Neal Cruz. He just has, this flair and this passion for the game. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw him break into the bigs this year, just given how bad this Reds roster is. So this is guy is an absolute stud. Doesn't really need much of an introduction. There's a reason he's in the top 10 prospects in basically all the major lists: Baseball America, MLB Pipeline, Baseball Prospectus. So he's a guy that I expect to see in the bigs certainly before long. All right, potential bounce back candidate. I'm going to go with Jonathan India. So I got this nice Topps Chrome Sapphire rookie card of his. He was all the rage in 2021. He won the Rookie of the Year in the National League. Then he had a bad first half last year and then a pretty good looking second half. He looked much more like his Rookie of the Year self in that second half of last year. So I think we could really see him regaining that 2021 form. And if he does, that would put him firmly in the top 10 second basemen, if not better, in the National League. So, in that 2022 or that 2021 season, he really turned some heads, and I think he has a chance really to get back to that. I do also have to mention Joey Votto. So I have this nice what is this? Some sort of parallel of his 199 out of Topps Fire, which may be a product that we don't see anymore after Topps' announcements. But I do want to just mention him as a potential bounce back guy, just because we've seen it so many times with these kind of veteran guys, these Hall of Famers or borderline Hall of Famers, who kind of have that down year. It looks like their goose is cooked, and then they have this like one big resurgent year at the end of their career. I think we saw Jeter do it. We saw A-Rod do it. I mean, I'm just mentioning these guys because I saw it firsthand as a Yankee fan. But we see it all the time, right? We see this all the time with these kind of guys of this pedigree. So he had a pretty crummy year last year. I think he had trouble staying healthy. He had a great 2021, crummy 2022, but I think he's going to be one of these great players who has a final hurrah. All right, sleeper time. So I've got Tyler Stevenson on my sleeper radar this year. Guy could flat out hit. I didn't realize how great of a hitter he's actually been since coming up to the majors. His problem is just staying on the field. So if he could just get himself on the field regularly and be the full-time catcher for the Reds this year, or maybe, spell at first base, play a little bit at first base. But if he can play himself, 130 some odd games this year, he's going to be, I think he could be a potentially elite player. I mean, he had a 370 WOBA, his weighted on base average. So that's a metric by Fangraphs, which would have led all catchers if he qualified. So if he had enough at bats or plate appearances last year to qualify, he would have been the leading offensive catcher in the league. So this is a guy who I think is on sleeper radar for the Reds this upcoming season. All right, over-under time for the Reds. So their over-under is 65.5 wins. They won 62 last year. I'm going to, unfortunately, have to go with the under for this team. They do have some fun young talent. I think that they have a chance to make a little bit of noise in future years as some of these prospects come up. But I'm going to go with the under 65.5 because they pretty much went from bad to still bad. I wouldn't say they went from bad to worse, but they went from bad to still bad. All right, moving on. We now have the Pittsburgh Pirates. So Pittsburgh, another team that's kind of a perennial basement dweller in the National League Central. Looking at their offseason, they shook things up. They made a handful of moves. Probably most notably is they brought this guy right here back, Andrew McCutchen. This is one of his early Bowman cards, a X-Fractor, number to 199. They brought Andrew McCutchen back into the fray. So we'll get him up right there. But he's kind of back where it all began, right? He started his career, I think he won an MVP with the Pirates. He was a top player in the league. As he aged, he hit free agency, bounced around a little bit. He played with the Giants, he played with the Phillies. I think he had a cup of coffee with the Yankees at one point. He's bounced around the league, but he's a long way from that form, that MVP form from 10 years ago or so. But I think he's exactly the kind of guy that a young up and coming team needs to bring back in. He's beloved by the fan base, and he's going to be just a great mentor for all the young guys. So definitely one worth noting, even if he's not the most productive guy in the world. They also brought in G-Man Choi, Carlos Santana, Austin Hedges, Connor Joe, Vince Velasquez, Rich Hill, and Lewin Diaz. So some, a couple younger guys, some like real veterans there, especially Rich Hill, I think is like 749 years old or something like that. He's been just pitching forever. He's basically the new Jamie Moyer, so he's hanging around for quite a while. On the loss side, they didn't really lose anyone super notable. Kevin Newman, kind of a middling player, Bryce Wilson, and Diego Castillo. So nothing too notable there. So they definitely got a little bit better, I think, with some of the ads. Stud and dud, star of this team. I mean, this one was pretty obvious to me. I'm going O'Neal Cruz. And this is just an absolutely beautiful Spectra RPA that I pulled. back when I was opening. It was out in '99. Back when I was opening in the off season, off camera, before I was doing back on YouTube, and it was one of the sickest pulls I had. And it was actually, it might have been the card that just propelled me to get back on YouTube, because I was just like, this was such an awesome pull. I really wish that I was able to like share this with the community and have a reaction on the channel. But I'm going with O'Neal Cruz here. So, he's just one of the most electric, athletic guys that we've probably ever seen in baseball. He's huge. He's 6'7". He has a laser rocket arm. If anyone remembers that commercial, or maybe some sort of skit with Peyton Manning, like, they said laser rocket arm, that always makes me think of that. He's the exit velo god of baseball. It's basically like him, Judge, and Giancarlo Stanton are just like these exit velo gods, and he's right up there. He might have the highest exit velo ball hit, if I'm not mistaken, since they started tracking the stuff. Of course, he's a young player. The thing he struggles with is plate discipline. He's kind of a low OBP guy. I think he was a sub 300 on the on-base percentage department last year, but like, it's basically like every ball he hits, if he can manage to get balls in play, he hits the ball so damn hard that so many of them are just going to fly out of the park, or, now with no shift, just make it into the outfield, or just, scorcher pass guys. So, but I mean, between his power and his style, he's just gonna make up for it. Like, make up for the fact that he, is a kind of a free swinger and is a little undisciplined. And that stuff's gonna come with age. He's still super young. So, he might be the most fun player to watch in all of baseball, honestly, even without like the most elite production in the world. I think because he's so fun, and because he has the personality, and because he hits the ball so hard, and he's got the flair and the size and all that, he's going to be a big guy in the hobby regardless. Even if he doesn't become like superstar status, I think he's going to be a pretty popular guy that's collected in this hobby, regardless. And he plays for, a crummy team, but a team with a lot of history in the Pittsburgh Pirates. All right, dud. So bust central here. I'm going with Ronzi Contreras. I'm sure I'm saying his first name wrong. I'm pretty bad with pronunciations, but I'm going with this guy. So he's if anyone doesn't know him, he had a pretty good year last year. He's this hard-throwing righty. He was a rookie last year. You see his rookie auto out of Stadium Club here. He threw 95 innings. He had a 3.69 ERA, so it's not like, it's not like he had a bad year, but it's not like he was like, so unbelievably dominant. But he was another one of these guys I mentioned in some of my past previews, who had this big innings jump from the year before. So from 2021 to last year, he had a big innings jump. I think between his 95 innings, inclusive of the minor leagues, was even more. And he's never thrown more than 130 innings, basically. I think he threw 132 in 2019, but he's never really come close to sniffing that since. So if they're expecting him to be a guy who continues to stretch out, and then he's having these kind of big innings jumps year to year, that's prime for regression. And the thing is, like I said, he throws hard. He throws 96, but his fastball gets hit pretty hard, which, tends to mean that, it's a little flat, it's a little straight. He did have good results. He walks a decent amount of guys. So if your fastball's getting hit hard, you're walking guys. Even if you put up good numbers over a short-term period like he did last year, it seems ripe for regression. So some people have him as a sleeper in their circles. I tend to have him as a potential bust or regression candidate. So, all right, prospect to watch. Pirates have a very good system, 6th ranked farm system in the bigs. Obviously, that's probably not surprising at all, just given they've had a lot of top picks. But their top guy is their top pick from last year. It's Tamar Johnson. Termar Johnson. I said Tamar. Termar Johnson. He was the 6th pick last year, something like that. He was a top 5 pick, I think, in the draft last year. Actually, I might be mistaken. He's the 35th ranked prospect on average across the 3 major publications. As of right now. And the thing about him that really jumps out is you look at this nice Bowman Invicta. This was such a nice insert set that they did last year. I think they did it 2 years. I think they did it in 21 and 22. But the thing that jumps out to me about this guy is that it's not very often that a 5'7" little second baseman out of high school gets drafted in the top 5. So yeah, he was a top 5 pick. He obviously must have shown something to somebody that they really believed, because, he doesn't have the size, he doesn't have the college pedigree, and they drafted him in the top 5 anyway. So, he is kind of expected to have this unworldly contact rate. I mean, I think they expect him to be a guy who just puts the ball in play just like all the time. When you hear something like that, and you hear about, second base, and you hear about his size, you of course think like Jose Altuve. But Jose Altuve was a guy who had to like go make the team by like showing up to a tryout and refusing to leave until they could see what he could do. As this guy is a top 5 draft pick, so someone who's going to climb through the prospect rankings. I wouldn't be shocked if by next year he's in the top 15, if not even the top 10. He's got to have himself a good year. He doesn't really have much to show yet in the minors. He had pretty low sample size. He was just drafted. He had a low sample size in 2022. So this year will be his first real test. We'll see what he's made of. Obviously, we'll see if he can, make those jumps and if the Pirates organization got it right by drafting the little guy. All right, potential bounce back candidate, maybe sleeper breakout candidate. I would say he's probably my break. I would call him a breakout candidate, and that's Ke'Bryan Hayes. So, some places, as I was doing some research, reading some up, they have him as a bust. I mean, I don't really know why you'd consider him a bust, just because he hasn't really been particularly good the past 2 years as the full-time third baseman for the Pirates. But, if he doesn't have those lofty expectations, I mean, that just means I think that he's going to potentially outperform what people expect. So he is an absolutely elite defender. I've mentioned that on the channel before. I think a lot of people know that. He's son of Charlie Hayes, a longtime major league player. But he's just among the best defensive third basemen in all of the majors. And if he could just get the bat to follow suit even a little bit, he's going to be a really impressive player. So he in his first 95 plate appearances, when he first came up in 2020, he was really impressive. People were, he opened eyes. They knew he could play defense, and the bat during that stretch was really, really good. But then in 2021, he had an 86 OPS plus. In 2022, he had an 87 OPS plus. The bat's really lagged behind. He's been a subpar, below average hitter for those 2 years. So if he could just get back to average, if he could just become 100 or 105 OPS plus hitter, which just means a handful of extra base hits here, a few walks there, will kind of get him up to that level. Coupled with the defense, he's going to be a very, very valuable player. So looking at over-under, their over-under is 66.5 wins. They won 62 last year, similar to the Reds. I actually have them over. So unlike the Reds, I see this team as having gotten a bit better. I know I knocked, some of their pitchers, Contreras especially, but I think we could see 70 wins from this team. It's a pretty weak division. So I think, between Cruz and hopefully Hayes taking the next step, and they added all those decent vets. The pitching is still pretty crummy, like I said, with Contreras being my bust candidate, and just in general I think Mitch Keller or somebody is their ace. But I think we could see this team winning 70 games. I think 72-90, something like that, isn't outside of the realm of possibility. All right, next team, we're going to take a look at the Chicago Cubs, floating around the middle of this division. Cubs had themselves a pretty busy offseason. Didn't have themselves a great season last year. Don't think anyone expected them to. They shipped a lot of guys out. But in the offseason, they signed a big contract. They brought in Dansby Swanson, spent a ton of money. They gave a short-term deal to Cody Bellinger. They brought in Jamison Tyone from the Yankees. They brought in Drew Smyly, a veteran starter. Eric Hosmer, a former very good first baseman. And Trey Mancini, who just finished winning the World Series with the Astros. They did lose Wilson Contreras, though. That is a guy who left for actually a division rival. They lost Jason Hayward, who never quite lived up to, his potential, and then Wade Miley. So, kind of middle to back end starter there. Stud-wise, we got to go with Dansby Swanson. I think he immediately comes in, signing that 7-year, $177 million free agent contract. He immediately comes in and becomes the star of the Cubs. He's a shortstop. He's playing a premium position. He found, and maybe it was kind of just walk-year related or what, but he found this 25 home run power in the past couple of seasons, especially last year. He had himself a really, really strong season. He had a pretty disappointing start to his career. He was drafted by the Diamondbacks, ended up with the Braves. Early in his career, he was the first overall pick. And early in his career, he just wasn't that great of a player. I think people thought he was going to be a bust, and he's kind of been just incrementally getting better and better the last few years. He won a World Series with the Braves, and then he had another breakout season, and he got himself paid. And he's really established himself as maybe a top 5 or so shortstop in the game. So he immediately becomes the Cubbies' best player and their leader and their captain of the infield, playing shortstop there. My dud, this isn't even really based in baseball too much because he's usually is pretty good, but I'm going with Marcus Stroman, and this is his rookie debut card from, 2014? I think it's 2014, Topps. And I just had a hard time coming up with one from this team because they're, it's not a particularly strong roster. I didn't see a ton of bust candidates potentially because I think most guys will perform as expected. But Stroman is one of just like the world's biggest tools. So, I mean, some people might not like me saying that, but if anyone's ever interacted with this guy or just like seen him like on social media, I think he's got the entire world blocked on Twitter, just like every person on the planet he has them blocked. I think I might be one of them. If you say even something slightly disagreeable in his comments or don't just like 100% agree with like every insane thing that he's tweeting out, he will just immediately block you, even if you're not being like, inflammatory or anything. But as far as on the field goes, that's that. I just don't like the guy. I think he's a bit of a douche. That's for lack of a better word. Sorry for the language, but if you actually look on the field, I think that he's been putting out some pretty good seasons. He had a little bit of injury trouble last year, up and down year, but his ERA plus has been trending down since 2017. So it could be a bad trend line. I'm not going to say he's going to be a total dud or a bust on the field, but I'm just putting him as a dud because I think he's just a toxic personality in general, and who knows if he's the kind of guy that his teammates really want to be around, to be perfectly honest. All right, prospect to watch. Another good farm system in this division. We're going to see a lot of that here. 10th ranked farm system by Keith Law, the Chicago Cubs. And the prospect to watch is going to be Mr. PCA, Pete Crow Armstrong. So this is a nice Bowman's Best Auto from 2020. Yeah, 2020 Bowman's Best Auto. This was actually pulled by Dustin Williamson, the LSU maniac himself, on his Facebook group, which I always link in my description for any of you to check out. He runs a really great group. He does a ton of great breaks on his page, and this one was pulled by him a couple of years ago for me in a Bowman's Best break, and I've held on to it ever since. Maybe something I look to move, but him not being part of my PC team. This was back when he was drafted in the first round by the Metsies, and then he ended up with the Cubs as part of the Javi Baez trade. So the Mets, rented Javi Baez for part of a season, and they gave up Pete Crow Armstrong, which I would say probably didn't work out for them because Pete Crow Armstrong is now the 27th ranked prospect on average. So he stormed up the prospect rankings. And I'm sure the Mets were really wishing that they had him back. So this is a guy who's dominated multiple levels of A-ball so far. He's only 20 years old. He hasn't really gotten himself out of A-ball yet, but in the levels that he's been at his young age, he has played really well. So he hit 312 last year. He had 16 homers. He stole 32 bags in just 101 games. So you extrapolate that out over a whole season, and you're talking, what is that, 25, maybe, probably like 25 homers and 50 steals, something like that. If you look at like a 150 game season, I'm not doing the math in my head, but like it's probably something like that. And honestly, he's not even really known for his offense. I know we always talk about offensive numbers, but this is a guy who's considered an elite defender, like could be best defensive center fielder in baseball type of defender. And if he follows suit with offensive numbers like that, not even necessarily offensive numbers like that, he doesn't need to put up numbers to that caliber if he's going to be such a great defensive outfielder. This guy, he definitely could be something special. Before we break off Pete Crow Armstrong, I do have to share the fun fact. I think a lot of people potentially know this already, but I thought it was just such an amazing fun fact when I learned it in the past year. Pete Crow Armstrong's mom, I forget what her name was, Susan Crow or something. I forget what her first name is. She's the mom in the baseball movie Little Big League from the 90s. So go look up Little Big League. Everyone probably remembers that movie. She's the mom in the movie, which is it's amazing. And then her son goes on to become this, tremendous baseball player. So, very, very, funny stuff there. All right. Bounce back candidate. This one might not surprise some people, might surprise others. I'm going to go with Cody Bellinger. So, this was a guy who had a tremendous rookie season in 2017. He was the National League Rookie of the Year. It was, him in the NL with Judge in the AL. They had these two, historic rookie seasons. They were just unbelievable. He went on to win an MVP in 2019, National League MVP. He had an 8.6 WAR that year. He jacked 47 homers. He hit over 300. He was playing tremendous defense. He was playing first and outfield, and he looked like he was going to be this generational talent. He's another son of a major leaguer. His dad was Clay Bellinger, who was a utility man for 5 seconds with the Yankees and maybe a couple of other teams. And so it looked like Cody was just going to be this guy, this chip off the old block and just be just tremendous. And then just something happened. He just absolutely fell off a cliff. He couldn't hit the ball anymore. The last 2 years he's had a 193 average with a 64 OPS plus. Like literally one of the worst hitters in the majors. He's striking out 30% of the time. Like he's just become one of the absolute worst hitters in the majors. He just doesn't look right, but you know, I don't know. Maybe he was always a pretender. Maybe like it was just like some insane anomaly that the stars aligned for this guy during that MVP season. But like when you're only a few years removed from an elite MVP year, I'm always going to give that guy the benefit of the doubt that he could bounce back. Maybe it's a change of scenery thing for him. Maybe there's going to be less pressure in Chicago. I don't know what it is, but like this guy had MVP talent. He clearly showed it to us. Maybe it's gone. Maybe it's never coming back. But I'm gonna say that these types of guys who have the MVP level caliber talent are always prime bounce back candidates. So I'm gonna always have them on the list as a bounce back after they come off some bad years, even if it's been a couple years in a row. All right, my sleeper for the Cubbies is going to be Nico Horner. We got a nice little refractor action from this is 2022. Yeah, 2022 Topps Chrome refractor here of Nico Horner. He finally got his chance to play full time last year. I mean, he's a guy who's been knocking on the door. I think he was a rookie in 2020. Yeah, 2020. He was in all the Topps products in 2020 as a rookie. He finally got his chance last year, and he really took advantage. He's one of these elite plate discipline guys. He makes a ton of contact. Which is what you just love to see, especially of your second baseman, typical middle infielder type of guy. Plays really good second base defense. And honestly, I just like wouldn't be shocked to see, I think he hit 281 last year. I wouldn't be shocked to see that turn into a 300 season. I mean, this is a guy who could easily hit 300 when you're putting that many balls in play. And you're so disciplined to the plate. He's just like a prime 300 hitter candidate. So definitely wouldn't be shocked to see that. Add on the great defense, like I said. Now going to be playing second instead of short, obviously because they brought Dansby in. But we could really be looking at this guy could be like a 5-WAR player, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. If he was a 5+ WAR player, that would secure him in the top 5 second basemen in the league. So really, really solid season for him last year. I think he's still flying under a lot of radars, and I think he could propel himself with a 300 season into the conversation of the top 5 to 7 second basemen in baseball. All right, over under time. So over under for the Cubbies this year is 78.5. They won 74 games last year. I'm going to go over 78.5. So I think they definitely got better. I like the offseason. I like the fact that they brought in Dansby, spent a little money. If Bellinger can, bounce back and, be even halfway of what he used to be as opposed to the worst player in the league, they can make some noise. I didn't really talk about much of their pitching other than Stroman just because I hate that guy. But their pitching is definitely still suspect. There's no doubt about it. I don't think this is going to be like a tremendous team, but they could be a 500 team. I mean, they could be a 500 team in this division, which isn't overly strong. All right, looking ahead, we're going to the Milwaukee Brewers. We're heading up to Wisconsin and talking about Milwaukee, the city of beer. So offseason, they had a pretty nice offseason. They added William Contreras, so all-star caliber catcher there. Played for the Braves last year. I think he started in the All-Star game. I can't remember if he was the starting catcher or if he was the starting DH, and then it was his brother Wilson who was the catcher or the DH. They were both starters in the All-Star game last year. They also added Jesse Winker, Brian Anderson, who was kind of a staple with the Marlins for a few years and is now going to be with the Brewers. Wade Miley, Abraham Toro. So shout out to Late Night Breaks. I know he's an Abraham Toro fan from his time with the Astros. Owen Miller and Bryce Wilson. And then on the loss side, they lost some kind of notable names. They lost Colton Wong and Hunter Renfroe, who were pretty solid players for them. Andrew McCutchen, who's on the back end of his career, we talked about him. Brad Boxberger, Taylor Rogers, and then Esteury Ruiz, who I don't think was a major league level player with the Brewers, but he was part of that trade with the Athletics that I mentioned in one of my past videos. Stud time. So stud of the Brewers, it's going to be Corbin Burnes. So Burnsy is the best pitcher in the National League, if not all of baseball. I didn't even realize that. I knew he had been absolutely tremendous, but when looking at it, he's led all starting pitchers in WAR, ERA, FIP, which is fielder independent pitching, a way to measure how these guys pitched, based on walks and homers and strikeouts, kind of trying to take the, if you have a bad or good defense behind you out of it, since the start of 2020. So the past 3 seasons, inclusive of the COVID season, he's led all pitchers in all these categories. I mean, he's just been absolutely, absolutely tremendous. I expect it to continue. There's really no reason for us to think it won't. The only knock here is not really on him, but it's that he had a pretty tough arbitration with the Brewers. So they made some comments. They said he was the reason that they didn't make the playoffs or they didn't make a run in the playoffs, whatever it was, and I think he took it to heart. He wasn't really too happy about some of that stuff. So I think these guys are professionals. I don't think it'll affect his performance this year, but he's maybe not going to be a guy who is interested in sticking around here long term. But he's going to carry this team and carry that staff without a doubt. He's just an absolute stud. All right, our dud is Eric Lauer. Don't have a card of his. Couldn't find one anywhere. Don't even really know a ton about this guy. But he was just somebody that jumped out at me as a potential regression candidate. I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on him. I will preface and say I love the Brewers rotation overall. I mean, with Burns and Woodruff and Freddie Peralta, Aaron Ashby when he gets back, Wade Miley on the back end will be good. But, Eric Lauer just seems like definitely a potential bust regression guy. I mean, he had a 4.3 FIP last year versus his 3.5 ERA, which means his fielding independent pitching, when you take into account just Ks and walks and the long ball, was much worse than his actual performance. So you figure it might have been a little luck, it might have been a little good defense behind him, all of that. But just really when you look at his makeup, he has kind of crummy command. He doesn't really have swing and miss stuff. That all contributes to that bad FIP. And guys like that, it just tends to catch up to them after time. So he did have his breakout. He had his nice season the last year or two, but the clock will run out on that kind of thing eventually. Prospect Watch. So another really nice farm system, the 8th ranked farm system by Keith Law. So I think we've had 3 or 4 of the top 10 farm systems in this. If I'm going to look ahead at the Cardinals really quickly. We're going to have like 4 top 10 farm systems in this division. So this division could really make some noise in the next few years if they have some of these guys pan out. But as far as the Brewers go, the number one guy to watch, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this even a little bit, is Jackson Chourio. So another nice Bowman's Best insert. Wanted to show these beautiful Bowman's Best cards off as part of this video. Chourio is the 7th ranked prospect overall on average right now. And this kid is just all the rage. Like I said, he's, everyone knows him. Everyone's talking about him. He was the youngest player in the 2022 Futures game. I think he was only 18 years old. He's born in 2004. I mean, he's super young still. And he had himself a monster 2022. He made it to the Futures game. He had 55 extra base hits, 75 ribbies. He played just 99 games across all the levels that he was at. He's got all the tools, right? He's the full package. Like most players his age, it's all about refinement and, taking the raw tools and making sure that they're, that he's disciplined and that, they get some of the, I'm at a loss for words, but, taking the raw talent and, turning it into the finished product is probably the way to put it. So if he can increase that plate discipline, increase the discipline overall, he could definitely harness this stuff into a really nice career. So I think he's expected to start at Double-A this year. Doubt we see him in the bigs this season. He's going to be only his age 19 season, but next year, definitely the year after, but maybe sometime next year we'll see him bust in. But he's definitely a guy that people are prospecting on pretty hard right now. All right, bounce back candidate. This is going to be really similar to what I just talked about with Cody Bellinger. It's going to be Christian Yelich. So we got ourselves a nice little Donruss Superstar Scribbles autograph here. I think I pulled this out of some sort of mystery box at one point. But this is another former MVP who, he had an even longer and better track record than Bellinger did, right? Bellinger's was kind of like isolated. He had the really good rookie year, and then he had the MVP year, but Bellinger was good for a while with the Marlins there and then with the Brewers. His 2 years that he won MVP, I think he won MVP and then he came second in the MVP voting in those back-to-back, 2018, 2019 seasons were just unworldly. I mean, he led the league in, hitting and average and slugging and OPS, both of those seasons. I mean, they were just unbelievable seasons, but then, just since the start of 2010, he just kind of really came back to earth and hasn't been particularly good. He hasn't been too excited. He hits a lot of ground balls. I mean, it's just, I still really like him. I think he could be a good player. I don't think he's the like 2 WAR player that we've seen. I think he could probably get back up around 4 WAR. I mean, he's not going to be the guy from those 2 All-Star or 2 MVP seasons anymore. That's just not him. It's just I just doubt he ever regains that form. But if he can get himself to a 4 WAR outfielder, batting 1 or 2 for the Brewers, I think that's pretty respectable. And if he can just get himself out from those low batting averages and just kind of like long outages where he's just like not doing much and not hitting for any power whatsoever, I would consider that a successful bounce back for sure. I have another bounce back candidate. I have 2 bounce back candidates actually for the Brewers here. I don't have really a sleeper or a breakout guy, but the other bounce back guy I'm going to go with is Jesse Winker. And this is actually a card I already showed off in a past video. I think when I was, going through him for the Mariners. He had the worst season of his career last year in Seattle. He went to Seattle, he got traded by Cincinnati. 2020 in the COVID season, in 2021, he had monster seasons with Cincinnati. He had really good seasons. And then last year, he was just not good. His hard hit rate collapsed through the floor. I think he had a bunch of nagging injuries that probably contributed to it. I think he had some surgeries and other things to try to get him healthy this offseason. So if he's back to being healthy and back in this NL Central where he was obviously comfortable, where he played well in the past, I think we could see him have another Cincy-like season. Even if he doesn't like reach quite those peaks, even having just a little bit, a little fraction of a better season from last year would go a long way for this Brewers team. All right, over-under time for the Brewers. 84.5 wins is their over-under. They won 86 last year, which I think people thought was a little bit of an underachievement. I think they were the favorites to win the division perhaps going into the year. I'm going to go with over 84.5. So I do like this team. I really love the pitching staff. Pitching wins championships, as they say. If they hit even a little bit, they can definitely make a run at the division and challenge the St. Louis Cardinals. All right, and speaking of the St. Louis Cardinals, let's bring it home with with last year's division winners. So, as far as additions and offseason moves went, they did add Wilson Contreras, who was an all-star catcher last year. I actually don't have one of his cards here handy. But they did add Wilson Contreras to replace Yadier Molina, who was their staple. So speaking of that, I'm going to make note of this card right here, this One Last Dance Gold from Update last year with Pujols, Yadi, and Wainwright. So guys who played together for quite a long time for St. Louis. You had Yadi retire, you had Pujols retire, having just one of the epic kind of final hurrah seasons. That's another guy who had a great final hurrah season. Like I was talking about earlier with Joey Votto. So those guys are both gone. Waino did re-sign. He is 41 this year. We'll get to him in a little bit. But those guys are all, or Waino's back. Those 2 guys are gone. 2 St. Louis staples gone, and also Jose Quintana is gone from the team. So not a ton of movement in the offseason. Obviously, the biggest things are that they lost, their kind of, big superstar, former superstar veterans. They were at the ends of their career. But the big addition was Wilson Contreras, who's an all-star catcher, so that's a very nice add for them. As far as stud goes, this one might surprise a few people. I think it will. But I'm going to go with Nolan Arenado. So, you're going to say, well, what about Goldschmidt? The guy won the MVP last year. He had an unreal season. He made a run at the Triple Crown. But to me, just Arenado is still the top dog in St. Louis. So, I think when you're looking at both sides of the ball, which you have to, which I like to, I mean, I'm an offense first guy for sure. But when you consider both sides of the ball, Arenado plays the best defensive third base in baseball. He's one of the best defensive third basemen I've ever seen in my life. I mean, there's no doubt about it when you're talking about his defense. But he also didn't skip a beat offensively when he came over from Coors. I mean, I think he had a little bit of a hiccup season, but last year he had a really tremendous season. I mean, he's a 30 home run guy. He's a 100 RBI guy. He's got 130 OPS plus every year. He's a 6 WAR guy. He wins the Gold Gloves. I mean, you just know what you're going to get with him every single time he goes out on the field. He's just a tremendous ball player. He's a little bit younger than Goldschmidt, so Goldschmidt, might start his decline a little bit earlier than him. But like I said, when you take into account the defense, for me, it's Arenado. I mean, it's close. They're neck and neck, but for me, it's Arenado. I think if you look at Baseball Reference, I think Arenado actually out-ticked Goldschmidt by 0.1 WAR last year, 7.3 to 7.2 or whatever the numbers were, and that was all about the defense. Goldschmidt clearly had the superior offensive season. They're probably 1 and 1A. This isn't meant to disrespect Goldschmidt at all because he's just absolutely tremendous. But, Arenado is definitely the full package when you talk about the defense. All right, our dud, our bust candidate. I'm going to say Adam Wainwright. So, not exactly the hottest take in the world, obviously, that a 41-year-old isn't that good anymore. So, he's going to be 41 this season. He might be even 42 this season. I don't know. I think he's going to be 41 this season. But he had like back-to-back pretty good seasons the last couple of years. So I think he might be having people thinking that like, oh, that's going to continue. He's going to be like a top of like the continue to be like this top of the rotation guy for the Cardinals. It actually reminds me of CC Sabathia, another good example that I know just from, my Yankee fandom, where he got bad for like a few seasons and people were like, okay, he's done. He's on the wrong side of his career. He's over 35, whatever. And Wainwright had that from 16 to 19. He had a 4.6 ERA. He really struggled. He had some injuries. He was just like falling off the face of the earth. And then he reinvented himself late in his career. He figured out a way to pitch with like diminished stuff. He became better, reinvented himself, squeezed out a couple of nice seasons after that. But then that last season, which, CC had it. He had an ERA approaching 5, I think. I think that Wainwright's probably going to be in the same mold where it's just going to be kind of an absolute grinder of a season. All right, prospect watch, and then we're going to get into a couple other things, and we'll get out of here. Ninth ranked farm system, like I was saying when I was looking at the Brewers. This is a really strong farm system division. A lot of great prospects here. And the guy to watch here, no brainer, is Jordan Walker. He's been all the rage this spring. He's tearing the cover off the ball. He's the third ranked prospect on average, so he's stormed up the prospect rankings. Tons of talent. He moved to the outfield because obviously he's blocked by Arenado. He came up as a third baseman, but he's blocked by Arenado, so he's learning the outfield. He's playing pretty well out there, I think. This guy dominated Double-A last year. He was really good in the Arizona Fall League. And then, like I said, he's having the really strong spring. So I think that they don't have to rush him because they have a bunch of really capable outfielders who we'll also get to in a minute. But he's going to be knocking on the door all season long. All it's going to take is one little opening, and I expect him to storm through it and take a spot, whether it's left field, right field, whatever, and take it to be his own. All right, bounce back candidate. We're going to go with their potential ace this year, Jack Flaherty. So Jack Flaherty looked like he had ace stuff. And when I say potential ace, he looked like he had ace stuff. He had a tremendous season in 18 when he was, I think he was a rookie in 18. And then in 2019, was really, really good. He was a league-leading whip guy, wasn't letting anyone on base. He threw 196 innings in 2019, and then injuries totally derailed him. COVID season happened. Pretty much the past 3 years have been bad for him. I mean, he's only started 32 games in those 3 seasons since. Obviously, the one season was short, but I think he was due to miss that whole season anyway with the injuries. If he could finally be healthy and, he could get back to that form. I mean, maybe he's not going to be a guy who's coming out and throwing 200 innings this year because he's still kind of trying to build back up from the injuries. But he's, the Cardinals desperately need an ace. I mean, we already talked about Wainwright. He's on the back end of his career. And the Cardinals definitely need an ace because their pitching staff is like not particularly impressive in my opinion. But if Flaherty can solidify himself as an ace with this offense, this team is going to be quite good. All right, last one, guys. I just want to mention, it's this group of guys right here. It's Gorman, it's Juan Yepez, it's Lars Nootbaar, it's Dylan Carlson. Not going to go into a ton of detail about them, but like, that's a great little. None of them are superstars, but that's a great set of guys right there. I mean, they're just very good set of players who any single one of these guys could finally break out and have a monster season. I think a lot of people like Lars. I'm still a believer in Carlson. Other people are very high on Nolan Gorman, who's going to come up and be a full-time player at some point this year. I actually think he might come out of camp being a full-time player. So any of these guys could be breakout candidates. I couldn't even pick one. So I just wanted to note them all. But, even one of them could bust, though, too. And that could be the door opening for Jordan Walker. But I think that any of those guys you could potentially see as a breakout. It's just impossible to pick which one it's going to be. All right, over-under time, 89.5 wins. They won 93 last year. I think they overachieved a little bit. I do like this team more and more every time I look at their roster, especially the offense. I mean, the offense, top to bottom, is pretty phenomenal, especially if these guys that they have laid out here in the front deliver in any capacity. But the pitching really is so suspect. I mean, if you need Jack Flaherty, who hasn't been reliable in 3 years, to be your top dog, and you have Adam Wainwright, who's 41, 42 years old, that really scares me. So I'm actually going to say under 89.5. I think it's going to be a struggle. It's a weak division. I think it's going to be a struggle with them and the Brewers with the tremendous pitching, the Cardinals with the tremendous offense, the two of them kind of like, banging each other a bit throughout the year, all season long. All right, this one ran even longer than I expected, 45 minutes. So I really appreciate anyone who stuck around for this whole video, as I bang the camera a little bit as we close out. So if you're still here, please, comment on the video. Let me know what you guys are thinking about the NL Central. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, hit the subscribe button. My 250 subscriber giveaway is still running. It's going to run for a couple more days through this weekend. So definitely get in on that to try to win a 2023 Top Series 1 Hobby Box. Otherwise, like I said, like the video, hit that sub button, comment down below, and we'll be back at you tomorrow with the American League Central preview. All right, folks, the best is yet to come. Thanks a lot. Take care.